You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. We'll have more news this evening, but first...
The latest Gene-ology, a Roddenberry podcast.
Episode 51, The Marquis of Donnybrook. Welcome to Mission Log Gene-ology. I'm Earl Green.
And I'm Ashley Thomas.
Each week on Gene-ology, we take a swing at Gene Roddenberry's early TV writing to see which morals, meanings, and messages can last multiple rounds with the test of time and will eventually make their way into his most famous creation, Star Trek.
Earl will be back with trivia in just a moment, but first, here is how you can reach us. Gene-ology is meant to be entertaining and informative, but it's also just the beginning of an ongoing conversation about the works of Gene Roddenberry. Drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com and join us on X, formerly known as Twitter, and Facebook at missionlogpod. While you're at it, please leave us a rating or review at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. 5 stars, please and thank you. And please remember, your comments could be used on future installments of Gene-ology. And now, this week's trivia. Earl, take a swing.
Thank you very much, Ashley. Everyone, get ready for the 5-finger trivia punch here. The Marquis of Donnybrook aired on December 26, 1957, the 14th episode of Boots and Saddles. Aside from our regular cast members, we have a couple of recurring cast members and one guest star that many of you will surely recognize. Playing Private Boone is Joel Ashley. Joel would star in 6 episodes of Boots and Saddles in 2 roles, 5 episodes as Private Boone, and 1 as a Private Ashley. This is his first appearance in Boots and Saddles. Joel starred in several other horse operas of the day, including Have Gun Will Travel, though never in a Gene Roddenberry script for that show. Joel also had a long career in theater and radio. He would narrate commercials for Lucky Strike cigarettes and guest starred on several radio programs, including The Shadow. Joel Ashley lived to the ripe old age of 81, passing away in 2000. Our second recurring character is Private Hatfield, played by James Dobson. Dobson would play Private Hatfield in 10 episodes of Boots and Saddles from 1957 through 58, with this episode being his second appearance. Dobson had a long career in film and television, spanning 1947 through 1985. He guested in numerous popular shows of the day, including I Love Lucy, Dragnet, Gunsmoke, Daniel Boone, Macmillan and Wife, and The Love Boat, to name just a few. He also guested in 2 shows that Gene worked on, though not in an episode penned by Gene, West Point and Highway Patrol. We lost Dobson in 1987. Our special guest star this week is none other than Leonard Bones McCoy himself, DeForest Kelley guest starring as Captain Merriweather. DeForest Kelley likely needs no introduction to listeners of Gene-ology. Today's episode is the first time DeForest and Gene would work together, but the only time DeForest would have a role on Boots and Saddles. Before he was on Star Trek, DeForest had a long career in film and television. He starred in a variety of military and police procedurals, mysteries, historical fiction, and plenty of horse opera. Aside from Boots and Saddles, he also had roles in Laredo, Bonanza, The Fugitive, Laramie, Bat Masterson, and The Virginian. For one of his more interesting film roles, check out a mustachioed DeForest in the cult horror classic Night of the Lepus. And by the way, this is not the only time we will run into DeForest Kelley on Gene-ology.
Shank Adams.
George Merriweather. What in the devil?
I figured a 5th Cavalry patrol would straggle in soon. We're camped over the rise. Ran into some Apache gentlemen. Seems to have some 5th Cavalry horses with them.
I might have known it. I'd chase them for 3 days. With the whole territory to move in. They ride right into Merriweather's arms.
7th Cavalry efficiency, my boy.
In the 1870s, Fort Lowell is a hot spot of activity on the western frontier. Boots and Saddles is the story of its commanding officer, Captain Shank Adams, and the men of the 5th Cavalry under his command. Act 1. It's a hot one today on patrol outside of Fort Lowell. The 5th Cavalry is on the trail of some Apaches who have stolen horses from the fort. It's been a tough ride, and some of the younger privates are swaying in their saddles from the extreme heat. Private Hooper is one of them, but manages to catch himself before falling. Sergeant Bullock admonishes him, "I warned you, lad. You drink your water in the morning. There's none left in the forenoon," but then kindly offers him a drink from his own canteen. Closing in on the Apaches, Adams and Bullock move stealthily toward their target when suddenly they hear, "Afternoon, gentlemen." In a shaded, previously unnoticed area is a neatly uniformed Captain Merriweather of the 7th Cavalry. "Shank! George!" The captains shake hands and Captain Adams makes introductions. Captain George Merriweather is his old West Point schoolmate. While the 5th has been sweating it out on the trail, Merriweather's 7th Cavalry has swooped in and caught their horse thieves. The 7th is taking a well-deserved break in the shade at the only wooded glen in the territory. It's shaded and cool with a sparkling canyon pool. The 7th is roasting game over the fire, cooling off in the pool, and, oh, hey, there are your Apaches fit to be tied, and there are your stolen horses. Adams shakes his head. "I might have known it. I chased them for 3 days with the whole territory to move in. They ride right into Merriweather's arms." Merriweather chuckles and chalks it up to 7th Cavalry efficiency. Trademark, patent pending. Adams and Bullock are stunned at the scene, but apparently this is par for the course for Merriweather. "Some guys have all the luck," Adams remarks. "George, he had a saying about you at the point. Serve Merriweather stew and he'll find meat in it. Serve him chowder and he'll come up with a pearl." Merriweather just smiles and says, "Why don't you join us? Always glad to entertain our poor relations from the 5th Cavalry." Bullock has stiffened to attention and is visibly irritated with Merriweather's ribbing of the 5th Cavalry, but obeys when Adams tells him to gather the men to join them for a well-deserved rest in the shade. Bullock is madder than an old wet hen when he addresses the patrol. He gives them sharp instructions, keenly aware of their exhaustion. "If one of you runs for the water, if one of you starts groveling that fresh meat like you was starved, so help me, I'll break your necks. Ain't having no pink-chinked dandies lording it over the 5th. Just remember, anything the 7th's got, the 5th's had it twice before, and 6 times as good. That includes food, water, liquor, and women." Private Hatfield asks Private Boone as they walk toward the encampment, "What was that last bit?" As the 5th approaches, the men of the 7th start to sneer derisively at them. "Look at these guys, they're a mess." Sergeant Hunter and Trooper Hoyt of the 7th holler at Bullock, the Irishman, saying, "Hey, we got 'em for you," gesturing toward the Apaches. "I'll wager it's the first Indians you've seen, too," says Bullock, and proceeds to deride Sergeant Hunter and his recruits. "Recruits?" "Yeah, recruits. Men so green you have to soak them twice daily." The 5th have a good laugh at this joke, but the smack talk is far from over. Hoyt says, "You must be ready for a drink after a good 3 days' saddle." "Nah," says Boone. "I had some water from last week." Bullock gestures magnanimously. "Drink some water for them, lads. The boys are just trying to be hospitable." Hatfield agrees. Sergeant's orders, after all. Meanwhile, Adams and Merriweather sit bemused at the antics of their soldiers. Merriweather observes the resentment of the 5th at being beaten to the punch. Adams remarks that the 5th can't be beaten. Merriweather scoffs at this idea, pointing out that the 7th has beaten them in parades, marksmanship, efficiency, ratings, but not soldiering, says Adams. Headquarters troops are great at drills. Outpost troops are better soldiers. Merriweather is clearly stung at the idea. "Name your game," challenges Merriweather. "The 7th will beat the 5th handily and send them packing." Adams declines, saying that the colonel isn't much for interregimental challenges. Merriweather insinuates it's because he's afraid to be beaten. Now it's Adams' turn to be stung. Across the glen, Hatfield and Boone are standing on either side of 7th Cavalry Trooper Hoyt near the water. Hatfield and Boone are trying desperately to hide their longing to dive headlong into the water. Hoyt bets the 5th doesn't have a pool like that near Fort Lowell. Hatfield encourages Boone to tell him about Flood Canyon while he washes his face. "What's that?" "Oh, yeah." While Boone spins him a yarn about Flood Canyon, Hatfield washes his face in the pool while also gulping down as much of the water as he can. Now it's Boone's turn. Hatfield continues the tale of Flood Canyon, while Boone takes a drink. Washes his face. Hoyt asks the men if they're going to take a drink. "Nah, the water's too cold for washing and too warm for drinking. Flood Canyon has them spoiled." and with that they're off, leaving Hoyt rather befuddled. Meanwhile, Sergeant Bullock and Hunter are seated around the hot coals as Hunter tends to several bits of meat roasting above them on green twigs. Bullock masks his hunger, feigning nonchalance as Hunter looks up. Hunter begins to regale Bullock on the perks of their post, Fort Benton. Only a mile from a nice little town complete with white fences and pretty ladies and green bushes. Bullock asks if he's ever seen Fort Lowell. He hasn't, but he's heard it's pretty rough. Bullock agrees. It's the trees that make it so bad. Trees? Oh, yeah, trees. They grow like weeds. Takes a whole squad just to keep up with the raking. Surely you jest, Bullock. Bullock looks up to the heavens and says, if I am, may every one of them fall over and blow away. Hunter calls his bluff, but Bullock doubles down. Of course there's trees. What else would bring the ladies 8 miles from Tucson? Ladies, you say? Yes, ladies. They come every Sunday for a fair picnic. They love the swings we built there. We give them a push, their skirts flying higher and higher. We've even caught a glimpse of a trim ankle or two. Oh, baby, yeah, Hunter has got to hear the rest. But first, he must get some salt for the meat. Hold, please. BRB. Bullock watches Hunter leave, then throws down on a hunk of meat, shoving the entire piece in his mouth and throwing the twig into the fire. As he does, Hunter returns and asks, what kind of women? Young? Bullock is forced to swallow the very hot piece of meat whole to answer. Eyes streaming, he sputters, aye, tender. It gives me a lump in me throat just to be away from them. Hunter is still skeptical, but says, I'll serve your captain first. Help yourself. Bullock says he'll wait. Doubt he'll be wanting too much. As Hunter exits, Bullock continues his meat piracy. Back to Adams and Merriweather. Merriweather is still trying to get Adams to agree to a contest. Horse racing? Mounted squad drill? Breakdancing? Underwater basket weaving? No. Hayes will never agree to it, says Adams. Merriweather doesn't buy it. They just don't want to be beaten and become the laughingstock of the entire cavalry. At this point, Hunter arrives with the meat, and Adams isn't too proud to munch hungrily on the piece offered to him. Merriweather takes his place and gets a brilliant idea. Sergeant, take your stance, he says to Hunter. Hunter grins, doubles his fist, and assumes a boxer's stance. Introducing Sergeant Hunter, box-fighting champion of E Company, 7th Regiment, shouts Merriweather. Box-fighting? Imported from England, says Merriweather, the science of manly defense. Adams has heard of it. Binning had sent away to London for a book on the subject. Well then, you can't turn me down on this one, says Merriweather. Put up or shut up. Adams is still unsure. After all, I don't think we've got a man who knows how, but Merriweather will not hear it. You already said your lieutenant has been studying it. He can train someone. I repeat, put up or shut up. Adams is stuck, but he catches sight of Bullock. Give me a minute. Adams goes off to talk with Bullock. Merriweather turns to Hunter. We've got him now. We're going to show the fifth a thing or two, he says. Yeah, and vice versa, says Hunter. I hear there's more than apples hanging from their trees. Trees? Asks Merriweather. Yes, sir. We're talking about Fort Lowell, ain't we? Later, at Fort Lowell, as treeless and punishingly hot as ever, we find Colonel Hayes seated at his desk. Wiping his brow, he looks up and says, Box fighting? Yes, box fighting, responds Adams, with Lieutenant Binning standing nervously with his box fighting book. Hayes says the most charitable thing he can think of at this point is that the heat has fried his brain, but Adams won't back down. The match might be good for morale. Box fighting happens to be... But Hayes rustles his papers, interrupting. Binning, where's that feed inventory? Binning nervously responds, in the casket, basket, right there. We've got... Enough. I didn't ask for a verbal report. Box fighting, Hayes mumbles to himself. As a matter of fact, sir, Adams notes, it was E Company of the 7th Cavalry that issued the challenge. It was accepted. On whose authority, says Hayes, getting to his feet. Adams responds, I'll agree, it was in error, sir, but... You are certainly in error if you think I'll allow it, bellows Hayes. But Adams presses further. He's given his word, and if he has to, he'll go to the colonel for backup. Hayes pauses for a moment and says that when he was a commander and he had a touchy matter to discuss with his commanding officer, he knew better than to do it in the heat of the day when he was busy with an irritating pile of paperwork, and then to tell him that he was going to do something that was against his expressed policy and judgment. But he supposes if he doesn't back him, then he'll just become the laughingstock of the entire command? That's about right. Hayes then turns on Binning. Well, what's that book you've been clutching to your heart? Binning jumps and responds, The Art of Box Fighting. The art of public brawling, says Hayes. Binning begins to explain how it's all the rage in England and is much more akin to fencing, but with your fists. Before he realizes what's happening, he's dancing around the office in a box fight stance, which Hayes finds unimpressive. Hayes turns back to Adams. Did it occur to you that we don't have a man experienced in this jigging about? But Adams put forth Bullock as their contender and asks that he come inside the office and give a demonstration. Bullock enters and punches a board in half as a show of strength. Hayes is actually impressed and inspects Bullock's fist. Who is he fighting? Sergeant Hunter. He's a strong lad. He got bested by some guy named Healy back in his training days at Fort Leavenworth. Hayes is skeptical again. We don't have a Healy. That's fine with Bullock. He whipped Healy himself, so we're good. Hayes isn't taking chances, though. He throws the book at Binning and tells him he is to train Bullock with every spare hour he's got. Binning and Bullock exit off to train. Adams has been bemused by this scenario, but Hayes warns him he's not enthusiastic about the situation. One thing he learned when he was a commander is that if you buck your colonel, you have to win every time. Adams will be personally responsible for the outcome of this match. No presh. Act 2. The Lowell parade grounds are baking in the midday sun. Any activity going on has advanced to a slow crawl. Bullock and Hatfield are at it, but Bullock keeps reverting to Donnybrook-style fighting. Binning corrects him, much to Bullock's chagrin. Bullock gets a good hit off of Hatfield, but not with the correct box-fighting form. You could have killed him, shouts Binning. Glad to hear that, says Hatfield, lying prone on the ground. Binning shakes his head. No progress, Adams. Adams considers. Maybe we should let Bullock fight his way, but Binning objects. There's not a way to beat box fighting. It's a science. A box fighter can cut an ordinary man to ribbons. It'll never be improved upon. But Bullock's strength lies in the power of his arm, not the grace of his feet. Hayes says that he only sanctioned the fight because it was to be above a barroom brawl, and that is the way it will be conducted. Bullock will box fight, or not at all. The next morning, Merriweather's 7th Cavalry Detachment arrives, pulling into formation on the parade grounds. Adams runs out to greet Merriweather, and as the company begins to dismount, the 5th Cavalry arrives to greet their rivals. Sergeant Hunter looks around at Fort Lowell. "Bring your apple basket?" asks Bullock. Hunter grins. "Nothing I like better than a good joke. No hard feelings." Hunter then extends his hand to shake. Bullock is perplexed, but takes it. "We may have a bit of a surprise for you, too," Hunter says. Meanwhile, Privates Hatfield and Boone approach the 7th Cavalry. Boone shouts, "Following the match, there will be a sightseeing tour of Flood Canyon." The 5th begins laughing at their joke, but the 7th just smiles quietly. Don't take it to heart, Greenhorn," says Hatfield. Hoyt simply replies that they like the idea, and Bullock better come too. He might need one of those hot, cold baths. Boone is angered at this. Big talk coming from that direction. Hoyt says that he'll do more than talk, and pulls money from his pocket. The rest of the 7th does too. Boone and Hatfield do the same and rally their own troops to empty their pockets for the dignity of the 5th Cavalry. The troops make their way to the stables to place their bets. Elsewhere, a boxing ring is being constructed, 4 picket pins in a square with a rope run about. In the center, another trooper is making the scratch with some baker's flour. Our full complement of troops begins to arrive. There's a lot of uproar and horseplay among the men. While Adams and Merriweather are amused, Hayes is displeased with their conduct. Adams greets everyone on behalf of A Company and informs them that by mutual agreement, Merriweather will serve as referee. Bullock enters the scene, clad in knee-length drawers and a pullover undershirt. Merriweather explains the rules. It's a bare-knuckle contest under London prize ring rules. That means no butting, kicking, scratching, eye-gouging, or hitting below the belt. Each knockdown is a round, and they'll continue until one fighter can no longer make the scratch. Sound good? Company E's contender enters the scene, but it's not Hunter. Who's the new guy? It's a big and burly, mustachioed gent, Private Fitzmaurice. Clad in trim white boxing attire of the time, Fitzmaurice looks like a true force to be reckoned with. Adams protests, "Hey, who's this guy?" Bullock is supposed to fight Hunter. He's not the only one protesting. Binning has words to say about this, and so does the rest of A Company. Merriweather responds, "You challenged E Company, and we have a new champion. Private Fitzmaurice, formerly of the British Isles, and fourth-ranking box fighter of South England and Wales." Binnings protests, "He's a professional." Merriweather says, "He's E Company now." Bullock makes no never mind. He's already entered the ring with Fitzmaurice, and they've approached the scratch. Fitzmaurice sizes up Bullock. "Ah, from our peat bog and potato patch colony," he says. "What was that?" says Bullock. Merriweather calls everyone at ease. "Are you going to forfeit?" he asks Adams. Adams is furious, but he exits the ring and takes his seat with Colonel Hayes. Round 1. Bullock, fists up, bobs and weaves, but takes a gut punch, which doubles him over, only to take another blow behind the ear, and it drops him. By the time he's back up, Fitzmaurice is already back in his corner at his second's knee. Bullock is gobsmacked, and literally smacked, as he takes his corner at Hatfield's knee. This is going to be a long match. 17 rounds later, Fitzmaurice and Bullock are still at it. The sun is still beating down too. Hayes and Adams move their previously shaded bench back into the shade. Bullock is still trying to get the hang of this box-fighting nonsense, albeit clumsily. Binning is frantically searching his book for anything that could possibly help. Fitzmaurice is amused at his opponent's ineptitude. Bullock is dishing it out, but Fitzmaurice isn't taking it, dodging every punch and landing many of his own. Fitzmaurice lands a big one that sends Bullock sprawling. Bullock is slower to rise this time, and Binning and Hatfield run out to help him back to his corner. Round 42. The sun is still beating down on the ring, and the men have all moved closer to the shade of the wall. Bullock is worse for wear, but he's not out yet. Binning is still checking his book and finds Bullock's flaw in his fighting style. "You're not fainting." "What, you want me to pass out?" Bullock asks incredulously. "No, faint," and he spells it out for him, or at least tries to. Doesn't matter. Anyway, he shouts the definition as Bullock approaches the scratch. "Here, I'll show you," says Fitzmaurice. He feints a blow to the head, then to the stomach. "Ah, thank you kindly," says Bullock. "Don't mention it, Irishman," says Fitzmaurice. Bullock feints at his opponent, who then counterpunches with a blow so hard Bullock is on the ground again. This match is taking much longer than we thought. The sun is high over the ring, and what bit of shade we had is all but gone. Enthusiasm has dried up in the sun as well. Fitzmaurice is sitting on Hoyt's knee, taking a drink of water from Hunter, who wipes his brow. "Hurry it up, will you? It's hot out there." Fitzmaurice gives Hunter a dirty look as Merriweather shouts, "Round 67!" The opponents tow at the scratch. Fitzmaurice gives a feint, drawing Bullock's guard down, but Fitzmaurice lands a cascading punch on Bullock's chin. Bullock's not having it, though. He recovers, albeit shakily, and manages to land a blow to Fitzmaurice's chin. Bullock was a bit off balance, so it doesn't have quite the power it potentially could have, but it's enough to send him backwards. The crowd erupts as the Englishman regains his composure, but the cheers are for Bullock. Fitzmaurice lands a graceful series of punches that puts Bullock back on the ground. A Company moans in disappointment. "We have to let Bullock fight his way," says Adams, but Hayes won't hear of it. He didn't approve of the match to begin with, and he's not about to make this a lesson in quitting. Round 68. Bullock makes his way to the center of the ring, but Hatfield and Binning are worried. How much more can he take? It doesn't take long before he's on the ground again, Fitzmaurice standing over him, panting. Hatfield and Binning helping Bullock back to his corner. The sun continues his vicious assault on the contenders and spectators. "Hope you brought sunscreen." Bullock makes his way back to the center of the ring, but he's down almost immediately. Hatfield and Binning drag him back, reviving him. Merriweather is mopping his brow with his handkerchief. Fitzmaurice is sitting on his second's knee, panting, exhausted, and furious. He reaches for the water jug, but Hoyt takes it away, shaking his head. Bullock is on Hatfield's knee, dazed and shaking his head. Binning is working him over. The art of box fighting lies in the dirt, all but forgotten. Will this fight never end? Round 96. Round 112. Fitzmaurice hits, Bullock falls. Fitzmaurice hits, Bullock falls. Lather, rinse, repeat. Back and to the left. Back and to the left. In his corner, Fitzmaurice is furious and hoarse. He's too ignorant to stay down. Give me the water. But Hunter declines, telling him he's too hot. Fitzmaurice ignores him and drinks deeply from the jug. In Bullock's corner, Benning is working over the day's sergeant. He moves toward Hayes and says, "We're throwing in the towel." "Not on my watch." Adams sides with Benning, but before they can come to a conclusion, Merriweather hoarsely announces, "Round 134. Bullock rises and staggers to the center. Fitzmaurice is staggering too, but not so much from getting pummeled as he is the heat. Fitzmaurice puts his hands over his eyes. Bullock swings and misses. Fitzmaurice isn't moving, but Bullock still can't land a hit. "Hold still, will ye?" shouts Bullock. Surprised by the voice, Fitzmaurice looks around to see Bullock cocks his fist back, and then he's on the ground unconscious. Bullock is sent to his corner while Fitzmaurice's handlers look their unconscious contender over. It's sunstroke. Fitzmaurice needs shade and fast. This match is done. Later, Bullock is back in uniform, his face showing the beating he took. There's an argument amongst the men. If Fitzmaurice couldn't get back up, surely he's lost and Bullock is the champ. Bullock disagrees. "He beat me, and if you felt how I do, you'd agree. Hatfield won't hear it. There's money on the line here, and we need to get paid." Hunter enters the scene. "Bullock, about those bets." "I'll handle the Irishman," interrupts Fitzmaurice, elbowing his way into the scene. "Say, I won." Bullock simply agrees. Fitzmaurice smiles at this. "I'm glad I beat some sense into your head. Tell me you've met your master, Irishman." Coolly, Bullock replies, "I'll admit you gave me a beating, fair and by the rules. But that's not enough for Fitzmaurice. Tell me you've met your master." Hunter pulls him back. "That's enough. He's a good loser. Let's call it a draw." E Company murmurs their approval, but that's not enough for Fitzmaurice. He wasn't talking to Hunter. He was talking to the Irishman. Bullock calls Fitzmaurice on his use of Irishman. "You keep using that word like an insult, which it isn't. Tell me what you think it means." Meanwhile, Merriweather, Hayes, and Adams approach the stables. Merriweather thinks it should have been a draw, but Adams denies it, saying heat exhaustion is no excuse. However, Merriweather feels it might have been good for Bullock to knock Fitzmaurice out. He's showing signs of becoming a troublemaker. Adams suggests he maybe could have done so if it used a different style. Hayes says nope. Merriweather agrees. The classical box fighting style is proven, and crack, boom, kapow, insert other Batman punch automatopoeia here. Fitzmaurice crashes through the stable door and lands at the feet of the superior officers. He's out cold. Bullock and Hunter exit the stables, Bullock rubbing his fist and Hunter toting a bucket of water. They salute their superior officers and then approach Fitzmaurice. "Ah, 'tis Fitzmaurice. Appears the man has taken a fall," Bullock says to Hunter. Hunter douses Fitzmaurice with the water, who comes to and shakes himself off, standing up. He sees the officers, salutes, and stands at attention, Bullock supporting him. Hayes demands an explanation, but before Bullock can explain, Fitzmaurice says that Bullock was simply showing him another type of fighting style, an Irish style. Not the Marquis of Queensberry, but the Marquis of Donnybrook. Merriweather comments, "I'm only glad it wasn't used this morning." Merriweather extends a hand to Adams. "I think we'll call it a draw now, eh, Adams?" "A draw indeed." Fitzmaurice extends a hand to Bullock. "That suits me, Irishman," meaning that as a compliment, of course. "Compliment returned," says Bullock. As E Company returns home, Hayes turns to Adams and says, "Captain, there's one other thing I learned as a company commander. When you win over your colonel, don't rub it in." "Yes, sir. I'll remember that, sir." As they watch the 7th leave, Benning approaches Hayes with his book. "Sir, I think I know what went wrong." Hayes cuts him off. "Nothing went wrong. It's been a pleasant experience, and an excellent idea, Shank." Benning is shocked and confused, but as Hayes walks away, Adams takes the book from Benning and leads him by the elbow back across the ground. As they pass a trash receptacle, Adams drops the book inside it. The end.
Earl, that was a real knockout of a recap.
I was looking for any opportunity to just start singing it. Da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But fortunately, that's all the singing I'm going to do in today's episode. because...
You said that once already today.
Yeah, but like a stubborn Irishman, apparently, which is something I can claim is in my heritage. So
Yep.
I am using that as a compliment. I just keep showing up again like a bad penny.
That's all right, my friend. I also have a good amount of stubborn Irish folk in my DNA.
But do you have much experience boxing? See, unlike me, you got to sit out the recent Mission Log episode where I sat in for Norman and covered the fight. And so, for me, this is like round 2. It's like...
It is round 2 for you.
Yeah, thanks, Gene.
No. Oh. No, I sadly do not have any boxing experience, though I feel like it might be something I might enjoy. Just because, it's good cardio. And I'm not a runner by any stretch of the imagination. If I am running, you should be too. Yeah. Something is chasing me.
Yeah, it's like the meme says, oh, do you want to go for a run later? From what?
So, but, it's good cardio and, it's good for your hand-eye coordination, which, again, that's not a thing I excel at. So, I'd like to learn the art of boxing, but I can't say I've ever been in an actual boxing match.
See, I do remember back in the day, because I am old enough that stuff like, the Thrilla in Manila was happening in my lifetime, and I didn't understand a thing. Why are these guys fighting? What is even going on here? But, I got it. It's a sport. I have learned a little bit about that sport over the years, often through it showing up in shows and movies. It's not a sport that I go out of my way to watch myself. And yet I'm always kind of amused when something is announced and, and it's the match of the century, and suddenly everyone is an expert on boxing.
It's like when anything happens in the news. We have so many people right now that are disaster management experts right now.
Yeah.
They know everything suddenly.
Yeah. Oh, yes, I am an expert in how to deal with the aftermath of a hurricane. Mm-hmm. Really?
Yeah.
Well, then, please.
By all means.
FEMA needs you.
Take a stab.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Go
take a stab at it.
Right ahead. Now, at the beginning of this episode, it feels to me like, and maybe I'm misjudging this, and this is a tell of how cocky the character is. Merriweather really ought to know better than to sneak up on Adams and his men in stealth mode.
Yeah.
Especially since Adams and his men have every reason to presume they are in a hostile situation. Pulling a prank like that seems like an excellent recipe for getting shot.
I thought that as well. It's like, I'm reading this and I'm imagining Bones saying it. Afternoon, gentlemen. I was like, oh, that they better know that distinct voice, because otherwise they're going to get trigger happy.
So I have to ask this. Which version of Bones, or at least DeForest, are you envisioning here? Because for some reason, throughout this episode, my thought was, this is Mint Julep's Bones. This is the guy who's sitting under a tree. Hey, Jimmy boy!
Yeah, he's got a little more of a drawl. I mean, DeForest was from Atlanta, was he not?
Yes, I believe so. Okay, while we are talking about people's heritage, since when is Sergeant Bullock suddenly Irish?
I had the same thing in my notes. It's like, was he Irish before? I don't remember that.
Yeah, because we had Sergeant Bullock in The Prussian Farmers.
Yeah, and I didn't remember an Irish affectation there.
Yeah, which makes me wonder what the performance was like in the show. Did he start out... Because in that previous script, the way Bullock was written was like R. Lee Ermey. And this time, he's Darby O'Gill and all of the little people at once. I'm telling you, lads, my heart bleeds for you. It's like, what? Since when?
This is like... If you watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine in the first season, Stephanie Beatriz is not doing the Rosa voice, which is very stoic and deep, and I can't do it right now because I have a lot of chest congestion, ironically. But then you watch the later seasons, and she's doing the Rosa voice. And then, when you watch Stephanie Beatriz in interviews, and you realize that's not her real voice, It's extremely confusing. This is what we have here. The guy is not doing his Irishman voice in these earlier episodes, and suddenly it's like he fell out of a potato patch.
Well, it's kind of like, if anyone is familiar with Space Battleship Yamato, which was an anime that was imported to the Western world as Star Blazers. Dessler, or Deathlock in Star Blazers, starts out as a human-looking person, and then suddenly, about 5 episodes in, all the Gamelons are blue-skinned, including Deathlock. It's like, wait, what? They just decided we need to be able to make more distinction between the good guys and the bad guys in this show. And it's just a weird thing to pull when you're several shows in. It's like, didn't you think of this before? But yeah, I definitely got the vibe that Bullock was not written in that previous script that we saw Bullock in. He was not written as kind of stereotyped Irishman. And I will have a lot more to say about stereotypes later when we get into discussion, because there were so many stereotypes punching each other out, jockeying for position in this episode at the same time.
Got thoughts on that too. So, something that is not going to come across to our listeners, during revisions, at one point, Hunter, I think, was called Peters. Did you notice that? Yeah,
I noticed that all of a sudden we had this guy that we didn't have in the script before, because there were a few white pages in the middle.
Yeah.
But the rest of them, again, this looks like it was almost a total rewrite.
Yeah.
And so again, I'm left wondering, okay, what was the first draft? Because the cover indicates a different date than all of the pages in the interior, except for those few white pages, which are undated.
Right. And then I noticed even sometimes within the same paragraph, I got really confused in the scene where Bullock was, stealing meat off the spit, because it talks about Peters and then it talks about Hunter. I was like, wait a minute, what's Peters doing? And then Hunter goes to hand the captains their portion. Within the same paragraph, Peters and Hunter, it's not like you have find and replace back in the day with a typewriter,
Right.
So I'm sure it's just a omission, but it was a little confusing at first. So, things that you're going to get reading a script versus watching it on film.
Yeah, exactly. It's just this guy from the 7th just popped in long enough to eat. Hey, it's Peters!
It's Peters!
I felt pretty bad for Bullock, shoving the whole chunk of roast whatever into his mouth, and it's just blistering hot, and he's just like, okay, and then swallowing it whole. It's like, oh, dude, no. I mean, I've never done that with, like, freshly cooked game, but there are these things that we have in the 21st century called pizza rolls. And on occasion, and no matter how many times I do it, I'm always going to do it again. On occasion, it's like, oh yeah, I'm just going to pop this into my mouth. Oh my God. Never again. Until the next time.
It's the game of the 21st century.
Yeah.
Pizza rolls. Their temperatures are either ice cube or lava.
Yeah, this is what we have replaced Russian roulette with in the 21st century, is pizza rolls.
Oh, man.
This episode is trying so hard to be so manly. It's literally in my notes. It was just like, good grief, so much testosterone.
Yeah.
And that leads me to a line from Colonel Hayes, where he is dressing down Shank Adams for wanting to end the match and get Bullock out of there before real harm comes to him. Having already been punched in the face who knows how many times. I didn't approve of this match in the first place, Captain. I approve even less of it becoming a lesson in quitting. Okay, hold the phone. I know this whole boxing match is all about, we're going to blow off some steam, it's a friendly rivalry, but we are soldiers out here in this isolated fort, and I'm assuming that Fort Benton is also an isolated fort, and that these men always need to be in fighting shape in case they have to, say, defend their respective forts. Is this no-holds-barred 120 12-round boxing match going to benefit anyone if the guy who we established in the previous script is basically our drill instructor has been beaten to a pulp? Is that going to help?
You know, I had this same thought. And it sounds like Fort Benton isn't quite as isolated. You know, it's a mile from town, so or so they say. But you know, even so, you've got two of your best guys, you know, slugging it out. I don't feel like you're doing yourself any favors.
Yeah, because presumably, if these are your champions for the fight, these are your champions in fighting a real fight.
Right.
If you have to hold your ground. And you know, for the record, the script does not once go to Fort Benton, so I'm not sure I buy, you know, the story about white picket fences and the lovely ladies in their skirts any more than I do Flood Canyon.
Fair.
I think all these guys are just puffed up, and you know, they have dialed the BS up to maximum, and because the whole story is just a one-upsmanship cranked to the extreme, and as Susan Ivanova called it on Babylon 5, worst case of testosterone poisoning I have ever seen.
One of the best lines in that show ever. Also, props for mentioning Ivanova. She's my favorite. I'm reading this script. I'm just like, man, I feel like I'm getting pummeled reading this script because it's so brutal. They're just beating the crap out of each other. It's awful.
Well, and it was quite a read and quite a recap because, due to all the stage direction, the page count on this one was a bit higher than normal because Gene's directing from the script.
Yeah.
It, you know, kind of goes back to the Highway Patrol episode where we had to, you know, we were talking about, and we're going to go and film at this marina, and we're going to get this angle, and it's like, whoa, I'm sure the director would like a word, Gene, but, you know, he's very green back then at the script writing game, and so, yeah, we ran into that episode of Highway Patrol, literally called Patrol Boat, where Gene was telling them exactly how the police are going to patrol boat the harbor. And this felt like a throwback to that. It's like, I have this all worked out in my head. You guys gotta love this.
Was Gene a boxer at all? Do we know? Or had an interest in boxing?
I don't know if he partook of the sport himself. He was a big burly guy. Mm-hmm. So one would argue that he possibly had the physique for it. But also, despite being a big burly guy, he was also, from so many accounts, the gentlest possible man. And so I don't really see him getting into a ring and throwing down.
Yeah, I was just curious. I like I said, I don't know a ton about boxing. I felt like I got a crash course in boxing of how the sport is supposed to work. I didn't know about the scratch in the middle of the ring. Also, why did we call it a ring if it's a square? That never once occurred to me until today when I was writing the recap.
That I can't answer for you, but I understand that somewhere in Fort Lowell, in a trash can, you know, if you go looking when no one else is looking, you could score yourself a free copy of The Art of Box Fighting.
I will have to go look.
You don't even have to wait for Amazon on that one.
No, just gonna go rifle through the trash. But I think one other observation I have in this, Earl, is all the descriptions of heat. You know, we've said it on the show before. We both live in the south-ish area. I hate being hot so much. I don't know why I live here. I have friends that live in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. I would move there in a heartbeat if it was feasible for me to do so, and also if I did not hate moving, because the climate up there agrees with me so much more.
I will tell you that Gene spent a good deal of his wartime service in the South Pacific. So, much like us, and I totally felt this through the writing, okay, dude understood heat and humidity, and pass that along to you, the viewer / reader, at no additional charge.
Yeah, so what was the deal with the guy, like, no, you can't have the water. You're already too hot. I'm like, should this not help?
I think we are dealing with some outdated pseudo-medical advice.
I see.
From a bygone era. Either this is what they believed in the late 50s, or this is what they believed in the 1870s. But it's kind of like, did you ever have a chance to go over to a friend's house to go swimming? And Mom was like, oh, now you just ate a big lunch. You have to wait an hour before you go swimming.
Yes.
There is absolutely no scientific basis in that. None whatsoever.
Somebody go tell my daddy. Ugh. I got in so much trouble once jumping in the swimming pool at my aunt and uncle's house after a 4th of July picnic lunch, and he's like, you gotta wait half an hour. I was like, Uncle Harold said I could jump in. I got in so much trouble that night when I got home.
Yeah. No, I think I think that's a very good example of the kind of relic of a bygone age that this represents, that this may have been common sense either in Gene's lifetime, or perhaps he did some research and this was considered common sense advice at the time that the show supposedly takes place. But I don't believe it holds true now. It's like, no, you get him into shade. Whatever happened to calling it at 10 rounds? We're going to do 10 rounds. And either someone has more KOs or knockdowns at that point, or it's a draw. But it's a hot day. Let's have some common sense. Again, this goes back to testosterone poisoning. It's like, oh no, we're going to keep it going until somebody dies. It's like, okay, then you are down a soldier. Think it through.
You're down a soldier and the other one's bloodied up, so they're going to be out of commission for quite a while.
Little common sense, people. Little common sense. And I think we were perhaps loading the script down with common sense from the before times. Okay, I have returned from my trip to the Punch Bowl, Ashley, and I'm going to tell you, this seemed like it was trying really hard to be a fun, lighthearted show, and not the usual, oh hey, the Native Americans are out to get us, as perhaps they should be. That seems to be the baseline condition of most Boots and Saddles episodes that I've seen the scripts for. So, much like Bullock's attempts to float like a butterfly, I feel like any attempt to find much deeper meaning in this story is probably going to be a bit wrong-footed.
Yes, this is Gene doing comedy. And, yeah, a lot of this is actually pretty funny. I enjoyed reading the, particularly the bit about Bullock trying to, shove the meat in his mouth.
Yeah.
While the other guy's not looking.
Yeah.
So
the historical precursor to pizza rolls.
Yes, the historical precursor to pizza rolls. The other guy's like, "Oh yeah, Flood Canyon," and like, let's go on about that. Oh, that was really funny to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I can deal with like let's have some healthy competition. This will be fun. But it's basically like it doesn't feel like healthy competition because it's all like, oh, you don't want to fight us because you're afraid you're gonna lose.
Yeah, there are places where the competition seems, shall we say, ill thought out. And we were talking earlier about heat and dehydration and maintaining manpower at a military installation. But the other thing that occurred to me is when we were covering episodes of Have Gun Will Travel, which after Boots and Saddles, man, I can't wait to get back to that last season of Have Gun Will Travel.
Right.
There were some outstanding examples of very nice, compact character writing in there. Here it feels like we are substituting some very worn-out stereotypes in the place of character writing. Now, on the one hand, I do like that we even the scales. Everyone comes out with admiration for one another. No harm, no foul. But up until then, we're laying on the stereotypes really thick. I mean, seriously, a potato reference?
Yeah.
And here's the bad part. Just because it's rolling out some new stereotypes this week, don't think for a minute that Boots and Saddles is getting a reprieve to the Native Americans from being a nameless, faceless, ever-present threat, because they've been pushed out of the foreground into the background, but they are still being treated as second-class citizens by the show, which is tying them up, and I guess we're not feeding them?
Doesn't look like it.
That's... wow. Okay. All of this is kind of an on-ramp to me repeating something I'm pretty sure I have said before. This continues confirming my feeling that Boots and Saddles was not a show that was ever going to let Gene do his best work. So the fact that we actually enjoyed the comedy elements here is something of a minor miracle. Because the issues with Boots and Saddles were all baked into the cake. You know, it was not Gene's creation. He was a freelancer pitching into the show. And so, and again here, so we have a script cover carrying an ink stamp that says complete on a date of August 26th, 1957. Nearly the entire script after that is on blue revised pages dated September 4th, 1957. So it really does look like another page one rewrite, but a page one rewrite that had to be done over Labor Day weekend. That sucks.
It's a sharp catch there that it was Labor Day weekend, because I didn't even think to look. That's rough. It's something I had in my notes, and I was curious to get your opinion. You know, because, yeah, I'm on the same page with you, friend. I don't feel like this is Gene getting to be at his geniest,
yeah,
if I may. I have to wonder, was Gene given, like, the basic plot or idea for this? Is like, we want a boxing episode. But then by the end of the episode, he has Adams dropping the book in the trash. Is that Gene, like, basically saying, yeah, we're not doing this again?
You know what? I feel like that's a really good guess at how this episode came to be, because it kind of feels like, you know, remember back when we were speculating that Have Gun Will Travel? It's like, hey, Gene, we need an episode with only one set.
Right.
Oh, Gene, we need an episode that happens at this tree that our location scout found. So it feels like this may be a case where, oh, hey, we've got some set pieces from some boxing show that another show on the lot did. Another show on the, what is it, the California Productions lot did a boxing episode. We got a boxing ring. Write an episode for that so we can amortize that expense of building that boxing ring. And, you know, throwing the book in the trash, yeah, I could totally see that as Gene kind of slyly letting the producers know, and this is what I thought of your idea to do a boxing episode.
Yeah.
Despite all that, you know what? I wish we could see this one. I just want to see baby DeForest Kelley here being to Shank Adams what Finnegan was to James T. Kirk. Although, think about, you know, that's another example of a not great Irish stereotype. Maybe I need to find a better example there. Even then, Merriweather is not exactly the meatiest part, but I would merrily weather the rest of the show's failings just to see one of Star Trek's big three, a decade before he shipped out on the Enterprise, appearing for the first time in a Gene Roddenberry script.
Yeah, this is definitely one I would like to scour the internet for.
Good luck.
Just to see if it exists somewhere. Yeah, I know.
Supposedly there are 7, maybe 8 episodes still in existence. The rest are either in the vault or it's a show lost to time. I think we're on the ropes now with this one.
Yeah, we got him on the ropes.
I feel like we've almost gotten the best out of this episode that it had to give. But I'm going to shock you here. There might actually accidentally be a message in this episode.
Well, you could have knocked me out with a feather. Please tell me more, Earl.
Okay, everyone keeps lamenting the fact that Fitzmaurice would be a greasy spot on the floor if Bullock could stop worrying so much about technique and just start throwing some haymakers at him. Once Bullock does get to let one of those punches fly, it's all over, and we could have saved everyone from both forts a lot of trouble, and this episode would have been about 17 minutes long. If someone has demonstrated what their gifts and areas of expertise are, let them operate within that. Don't try to make them swim upstream against it for some arbitrary reason. I mean, by all means, do challenge them, improve and expand your skills in that area. But don't expect great things out of someone when you take away what they are good at. Reading the exhaustively detailed stage directions for boxing scene after boxing scene, I felt like Bullock having to endure 100 rounds of humiliation was, well, first off, possibly physically impossible in that heat.
Yeah, good grief.
But it was about as instructive as removing a certain famous starship captain from the big chair so he could be an admiral and push some paper around. Both characters, and I'm sure I don't even need to tell you who I'm talking about, both characters got taken away from where they thrive, and it didn't do anybody any good. I don't know if that message is explicit, and we may kind of be in the same area as we had with the ageism message in the first Boots and Scuttles script that we covered, where the message is there, but it was a message that could have been delivered by any other show, so we may be back on that square. Even if the message is not that explicit, I still think it's there. Maybe more by accident than by design, but it is there. I will hand it over to you after I just get this one last punch in. Because this episode assumed that the audience was not familiar with the rules of boxing, this might have used boxing much more effectively than a certain Voyager episode I recently heaped abuse on over on our sister show Mission Log. And with that, for me, my fight is over. Over to you, Ashley. What did you get here?
I got almost none of that. So I think that is a wonderful moral meaning or message to assign to this show. I like the idea of, hey, this person is clearly good at doing this way, and it is effective. Why are you trying to make them do it another way? Because that is the preferred method. It's a good question. Listeners of this show may not know, but I really, really love Captain Marvel. I love Brie Larson. I love the Captain Marvel film. I especially love the Marvels. That is, it's definitely in my top 5. It's definitely the Marvel film I have seen the most. But
top 3 for me.
Yeah, of MCU films, yes, top 3 for sure. But what I love about Captain Marvel in that first movie is, you know, if you've seen it, Jude Law's character's all like, no, fight me on my terms. And she just slugs him and he goes flying across the desert. And she says, I don't have to prove anything to you. Because basically her whole life is she's been told, no, you have all these abilities, you can't use them because it's unfair to other people. And when she finally realizes, no, I have all of these abilities, why can't I use them? Like, you are only holding me back because you want to control me. And I love every second of that so much. Because women get told all the time, you can't do this because you're not abiding by these standards. It's like, I don't have to. Like, who says I have to? So I think the idea that, hey, let this guy just do his thing, because he'll do it right, and we could have, you know, all gotten on with our lives, and the poor guy wouldn't have had heat exhaustion. He would just had, you know, a concussion instead. I don't know which one's better.
Yeah, I figure all of these guys are probably suffering from at least some kind of low-level heat exhaustion.
Yeah.
if the much talked about Apaches show up at their door, what kind of shape does this leave them in? So, I think perhaps another message implied here is, okay, if you're going to do this, put some common sense limits on it.
Yeah. Yeah, and this it's bare knuckle. Like, these guys' knuckles should be bleeding and bloody if they have knuckles left after this. Also, like, I just listened to a podcast about a guy who he's a stuntman, suffered a traumatic brain injury, and talking about how, the more concussions that he had, the more a lot of people don't realize how much of that affects your mood, can cause depression, and change your mental and emotional stability because of how
it's a cumulative effect.
It's a cumulative effect, and so that's what I'm thinking about when I'm reading the script for this. Like, these guys ought to be like completely delirious. Like, there's no way this could have gone for. Let's see, what was the final count on that? 134.
Oh, 134. Okay, I misspoke earlier.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's just stupid.
Yeah. I would love, again, I keep thinking about what you said a couple of weeks ago about how Paladin showed that he was pretty concussed himself in the what was it, El Paso stage episode?
Yes.
Yeah, talking about how, Richard Boone showed that, if you get knocked in the head a few times, that hurts. And you're not working real good after that. I wish we would get more of that realism. I think people would be far less likely to do dangerous things like pummel each other.
I promise we're not going to turn the entire rest of Gene-ology into the Richard Boone fan club, but I wish to point out that when I was talking about shows where big guys take endless punishment and nothing bad ever happens to them and they're basically made of metal, this is what I'm talking about. I don't think in the history of boxing anything has ever gone 130 rounds. That's not real boxing. I feel like that's comedy. That's TV comedy boxing. Now, I don't have that number in front of me, so I can't say with certainty. But I think any sane referee, any sane booking agent, any sane promoter would call it at a much lower number. So, we were asking ourselves earlier, how familiar is Gene with boxing? I'm starting to think maybe not at all, and he was assigned this because we've got a boxing ring set piece inherited from another show, and hey, do a boxing match episode. And so, I am now totally on board with your theory that Binnings throwing the book in the trash is Gene letting the producers know, and this is what I think of your boxing episode idea.
Now that I'm thinking about it, I was like, 134 rounds later. Like one of the SpongeBob interstitials. They didn't play Eye of the Tiger afterwards.
Yeah, no one was up for that. Everyone was like, let's just get out of the heat. We're done.
Yeah, they're like, nah, screw this.
Mission Log Gene-ology is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. Special thanks to the Roddenberry Repertory Players. Our cast this week featured Jeff Gauntt as Captain Shank Adams and Larry Nemecek as Captain Merriweather. If you would like to support us directly, you can do so at patreon.com/missionlog for early access to shows and the Mission Log Discord. If you have any material that might be of interest to us that isn't already in the Roddenberry archive, drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com. Our website is missionlogpodcast.com. And on the next Gene-ology, Mail Call.
Special thanks to consulting producers Matt Esposito, Homer Frizzell, Rand Hurl, Tom Kozak, Julie Miller, Mike Richards, Mike Schabel, Paul Shadwell, and David Takechi.
Back next week with more of your favorite programs. This concludes our broadcast day.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.